Thanks everybody for joining us today. This is the second in our conversations with Foothill Transit's former executive directors, and there is a lot of very rich history that happened before many of us got here, including me. Although you can also blame really all three of them for my involvement with the organization, as Roger had a very key role in my joining Foothill Transit, and who would have thunk that 15 years later I'd still be here. So with a little vacation in the middle for 2 years or so.
Good for you.
But Roger, thanks for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you back and to share some of the early stories about the organization. We were chatting just before coming in today about your first introduction to Foothill Transit, and it was not as our executive director. Take us back to how you came into contact with this organization.
Well, it was interesting. I was working for one of the neighboring systems, Omnitrans, and I was the director of operations at Omnitrans. And the company called ATE Management, later bought by Ryder Public Transportation, proposed me as their general manager here for the local service. And that was back in August of '89. We got notice July 1 to start up August 1, and we had to have service on the street by August 18th.
Wow, fast.
And well, it gets a little more interesting because we didn't really have a facility.
Well, tell us about that, because that's I think we have these beautiful facilities today, but
back then the private operators used whatever they could find where they could store buses, and the neighbors wouldn't complain about the noise. And we went into one of Ryder's facilities because Ryder did the maintenance for us. And we had to take over this floor that was used as the driver's break room, the truck driver's break room.
Wow. And
we had to build offices there. We had to paint, put in carpeting, buy furniture, the whole 9 yards, and have service on the street in 3 weeks' time.
Wow.
And so we were able to achieve that. And I think that's really what Foothill Transit was all about, achieving the unachievable. So.
And I think that's something that holds true even today. And so all of you that we talk about moving at the speed of Foothill. So whenever you say things are going to slow down, it hasn't slowed down, I don't think, in 25 years. So
no.
But that's part of our DNA that goes way back.
And just to reflect a little bit, as I was driving over here today, I got to see some of your fleet and saw the new Proterra buses. Beautiful, I must say, and saw an articulated bus on the freeway.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm especially proud of is that we decided early on that it was zero graffiti. And I see a few familiar faces here in the audience, and that was unheard of, because that was one of the things that Pete Shabarm, this was really his vision of Foothill Transit. And he was fed up with the dirty buses, the buses filled with graffiti, the buses where you didn't want to ride because you were afraid for your life. And he just decided to secede from the SCRTD, Southern California Rapid Transit District. And so when I see these buses here today, the way they look, they still look as pristine as they did back in '89.
And that really goes back to those early days and those early principles. Part of that too, as I'm thinking about it, not only do we not have graffiti, but why not slap ads all over the buses back in those early days? I know money was tight.
We had many discussions about that, but those discussions didn't last very long, because it was the image. We wanted to portray the image of clean, inviting, comfortable service, and when you put the ads all over, it was our opinion that ads are nothing more than graffiti.
Sure.
And so it kind of fits with the zero graffiti policy.
Really gets to the concept that we still hold true to, which is that our bus is our best form of advertising. in terms of our current riders and in terms of what we do for the community broadly.
That's right. It's all about the brand.
That carries forward. So you started off in the operating side, but then moved over to the administrative side of the house. How did that happen?
Well, it's funny when you're in the trenches together, you get to know each other quite well. Yeah. And Bill Forsyth, back in the early days of Foothill Transit, there was 3 staff members. Bill Forsyth, Adele was the administrative assistant at that time, and a very young man. I'm not even sure he was 21 at the time, but he was the route supervisor.
Okay.
And so really we were all in the trenches together as we started up the service. And it was in that process that Bill and I developed a close relationship, and he asked me if I would be interested in coming over to the zone office as his deputy.
And that really was the term back in the day, the zone.
The zone office,
yeah,
that's right.
I know sometimes I'll hear that every once in a while, but it really is, we don't use that anymore. But
so what do you call it today?
Administrative office.
Okay.
But I remember.
Well, so then I became an employee of Forsyth and Associates, but I was the deputy executive director of Foothill Transit, and it was it was a lot of fun, and you know, it was part of the worst days, but then many more great days that we had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Give us a little more insight into the good and the bad, the worst part and the really great part. Walk us through a little bit of that.
Well, the worst part was that I didn't know anything about Foothill Transit when I accepted the job as the GM for ATE. ATE was given a 5-year contract. Initially it was for 30 buses, and it was really just the local lines. And then later we got an additional contract for the 480, 481, and some of the additional local lines. Back then it was all packages, and I don't recall now. I think it was like 3 or 4 packages of service. But and due to the great effort of my team with ATE, we got the lion's share of the business. So I was pretty proud of that.
Absolutely.
But we got the 30 buses, and we could only operate 18 of them to begin with. The rest of them had to sit.
Okay.
And that was because everything was held up in the courts. And that's what I mean by the best and the worst.
Sure.
The worst was, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up to operate a decent sized system. And but the buses kept coming in, and we didn't have the service. The RTD had taken us to court. The unions had taken us to court, and it was appeal after appeal after appeal. And then ultimately, I have to give real credit to Bill Forsyth, because part of the strategy was that as soon as we won an appeal, we had the buses on the street that afternoon. It was kind of like you claim the service as soon as it's awarded to you. So it was a bit of a chess match.
Sure.
And fortunately, we had a great guy there that was an excellent chess master.
It was a big chess game back in the day in terms of pulling this all together. Quite amazing. So you then transferred over to the zone as the deputy, and in terms of your role as deputy, and then how did you transition on to executive director?
Well, so I was now one of 4 staff members at the zone office.
Huge growth.
And my focus was entirely operations.
Okay.
Foothill Transit didn't really have any standards in terms of what the contractor should be doing. Actually, the express bus service was operated by school bus companies.
Oh, okay.
And that was, Aaron, you remember Embry. So we had Embry buses, and then we had Laidlaw, which was Laidlaw Transit, but it was still more a school bus operation than it was a transit operation. And they felt that school bus operators could do the job well because the school bus operators are used to doing things in the morning, taking kids to school, and then bringing them home in the afternoon. So they didn't think it was much different. But running a transit system does require a different set of skills than running school buses.
Sure.
So I was really focused on setting the standards and getting compliance with the operators, and one of the things that the original executive board was focused on was setting us apart from the old SCRTD, which was important because the service out here, as SCRTD had financial problems, they always wanted to cut service where it was least productive. And so where does that happen typically but in suburbia?
Right.
And not in the inner city. And so in order to ensure that we built the ridership, you had to provide the quality of service that made it attractive to people. And I know Bill and I talked about this many times, where you want to build a service that's attractive to the choice rider, to that person that really can make a decision. Well, I'm going to drive my car, or I'm going to carpool or van pool or whatever, but you won't catch me dead on one of those buses. And we were very successful in attracting new ridership because we provided a clean, inviting environment for them to use to get to where they wanted to go.
Yeah. Again, those principles are the same types of things that we hang on to today. So that early foundation carries through. You should be very proud of that.
That's
great stuff. So you became ultimately executive director. What caused that to happen? Why did Bill leave that role, and how did you wind up in that particular spot?
Well, Bill is a real visionary, and he wanted to build Forsyth and Associates, and so he couldn't do that and be full-time executive director at the same time. So he stepped out of that role and was more of an advisor, and I took over as executive director.
Great. What were some of the big challenges that you faced when you served in that capacity?
Well, we hadn't fully implemented all of the service, so that was one thing, to finish implementing all the service.
Still very young as an organization.
Still very young, and we started in '87.
Okay.
And so we finished implementing the service in '91, and then funding became an issue. Imagine that.
Sure.
And so instead of just depending on the local funding here, it was important, if we wanted to grow, to be able to find some additional funding sources. And so I made a lot of trips to Washington, D.C., met with our congressional delegation and members of the FTA, and we secured additional capital to buy buses and other things that the agency needed. But it was also a matter of building that relationship beyond the San Gabriel Valley, and so get that national recognition that Foothill Transit is now a player, that we are not SCRTD, or now it had switched over to MTA. But that was probably the biggest challenge, because I'd never done anything like that.
Sure, and that funding component was huge. Without the additional funding, things would not have happened. And again, I think that relationship that you established early on, that presence in Washington, has continued to allow us to be successful at the national level in terms of advocating not only for this agency, but for transit in general. Mm-hmm. So again, important foundational components.
Well, and one of the things that Congressman J.
Kim?
J. Kim.
Yes.
He was one of the principals in helping to make sure that we got recognized by Congress as the example for reinventing public transit throughout the United States. So
do you remember about what year that was? That was in the, what, early 90s, wasn't
I
it?
want to say it was like 92.
Yeah, recognition in the
92.
Congressional Record related to the achievements. Right. Yeah, that has to be something that that you count as a real mile marker in terms of your career. That's huge.
But it's credit to the entire team here.
Sure.
And to our contractors, because contractors understand if you get a contract with Foothill Transit, you've arrived.
You've arrived.
You've arrived. And then they get into the position that they go, what did I get into?
And why is that?
Well, because of the standards.
Sure.
You know, one of the big differences between Foothill and a lot of other agencies, there's a big one here to the east, over across the state line, that really thought that they were better than us. And so I really take a lot of pride in the fact that you're doing so well today, here 25 years later, and I know how they're struggling. And I think, again, you go back to those principles. Sure. Of efficiency, of effective use of the dollars, and making sure that our focus is on the customer. And when you lose sight of those basic principles, that's when things start falling off the rails.
Absolutely.
Or the tires fall off the bus.
No, very important. Very important. Again, it's those early principles. Now, the system under your leadership was named Outstanding Transit System by APTA, not once, but twice. What were some of the characteristics that led to that recognition? Because that's huge.
Well, I think, and again, full credit to the staff, because I think we all shared in the excitement of that and the achievement of that, because I don't know of another transit system around the country that had won that award twice.
Especially 2 years. There was a year break in between.
That's right, 2 out of 3 years.
2 out of 3 years, yeah.
I don't think it's ever been done before, and I don't think it's been done since. So, well, again, you go back to those standards. You go back to the basic principles of efficiency and effectiveness, and when you looked at our fare box recovery, and I know you focus on that just as much today as you did back then. You look at the quality of service to the customer, because you know, some systems, Bill, this is another thing Bill and I talked a lot about. If it wasn't for those damn customers, we could run a pretty good bus system.
Sure.
Well, now that was not the case with Foothill Transit. Sure. The customer is king, and we need to make sure we take care of the customer. So it was all the things that go into that, and then they look at the cost, the fare box recovery, they look at the safety record, everything there is to operating a transit system. And so this team was the one that was recognized. And again, the private contractors took just as much joy and satisfaction in achieving that, and they used it to their advantage in promoting their business elsewhere.
Real team effort.
It was a total team effort.
Absolutely. Very cool. Now, one of the things that happened under your leadership was the creation of the transit stores, if I remember correctly. Tell us a little bit about how that idea came about, and about the first transit store, because I never saw it. It was gone before I got here, but tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there's the mother of Foothill Transit to thank for that. That's Judy Wright.
Judy Wright.
And Judy is just a whirlwind. She is constantly on the go, and just she could be very critical, but she was a tremendous cheerleader as well.
She was.
And she was a real advocate for the people,
yes.
Not just in Claremont, but throughout the San Gabriel Valley. And she made her presence known. And Judy and I were talking one day about the whole thing of the fare media, and how do we increase the pass sales, and the ease to get passes, and to get information on how you use the service.
It's critical.
So we said, well, when you want something, you go to the store and buy it. So why don't we create our own transit stores?
Okay.
And we started out with I think Puente Hills Mall was the first one.
Was it Puente Hills Mall or was it Eastland?
Oh, it was Eastland. Eastland, that's right.
Yeah. Eastland, when Eastland wasn't like Eastland is today.
That's right.
Yeah. And some folks may not remember that.
I didn't remember that. So
they may not even remember what Eastland was before.
That's
Eastland,
right.
You know, now Eastland's the big box retailer. But
it was dead. So the rent was real cheap.
And that was one of the original indoor malls.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's their claim to fame.
Yeah.
But and from there we built it out, and actually we had all 5 stores. Araceli and I were talking about that just before earlier today, and so we had all 5 stores then. And I think I don't know how Claremont's doing today, but one of the most interesting one was the Claremont train station.
Sure. Yeah, very, very historic location for a transit store. It continues to do well.
And there again, that was thanks to Judy and her vision, all of her efforts.
Sure. Yeah, no, Judy was a great visionary and certainly a tremendous supporter of the organization over the years. Tell us some more about some of the other board. You interacted with a lot of board members during your time.
I did.
Anyone stand out in any particular way, one way or another?
Well, there's certainly each one of them stand out in a different way. But there was a mountain man called Bob Bartlett.
Bob Bartlett.
And Bob is someone that I always enjoyed engaging in dialogue because he had an opinion about everything, and he was another one. That's one of the things that made Foothill what it is today. Is the original board members were real dynamic. They were real doers.
Absolutely.
They were hands-on. Whatever it took to make Foothill Transit succeed, they were willing to do. And you know, as an elected person, sometimes egos can get in the way.
Sure.
I didn't see that with the original board members. And there again, that was another unique part of Foothill Transit. Those 5 executive board members worked very well together. Mike Lewis is another name. Sure. That he was Pete Jabarm's chief assistant, chief of staff, I think. Yeah. And he was the county's original representative on the executive board, and he was really into the numbers, and he would challenge us at every turn in terms of what the numbers were saying.
Well, that's good.
And just to go back to Bob Bartlett, because I remember Bob Bartlett his big thing was the response time on answering that phone. Oh, yeah. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was 98%. He would accept 98%, but if it ever got below 98%,
high standards.
Staff better have an answer for him. And that was the way that board was. We talked about Michael De La Torre earlier.
Sure.
And I know Michael was a big proponent.
And our longest serving board member continues to serve.
Has he got the record now for the longest serving?
He does.
Okay.
He does.
Michael was very young when he started here, and he was originally appointed by Supervisor Gloria Molina. And Michael was a big proponent of Foothill. Tom Sykes from Walnut, another one that he was throughout the greater LA region, and everywhere he went, they would promote Foothill Transit. Willie White from Pomona.
Right.
Yeah. You know, it's there's just, I hate to bring up one name because I know there'll be some that I'll forget. John Vasana.
John Vasana continues
John Vasana, when he got appointed to the MTA board, we all celebrated because we knew what that meant.
Right.
You know, how important it was to have somebody there at the table that would represent the San Gabriel Valley and Foothill Transit. You know, we were one of 13 municipal operators here in LA. I don't know if there's more municipal operators now.
I think there's a total of 18 now.
Total of 18. And so you need to answer this question for me, but I would be surprised if there's any that have achieved anywhere near the success that Foothill has achieved.
You know, I think it's been interesting in the region since Foothill was created. In some respects, I think we've had at least some impact on really raising the bar for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's helped the quality of service across the county improve. And I can't draw a direct connection from point A to point B on that, mm-hmm. but I think as you look at transit service across the region, collectively we're all doing better. And that's a great thing.
Absolutely.
That's a great thing. And if we've had some little small part in helping to raise that bar, you know, we've really contributed.
Well, I think along that same line, really what I was referring to is financially.
Financially.
Because I think Julie was an excellent addition here because wow. Julie came from the MTA and knew the finances inside out and was really phenomenal at bringing in money.
So we haven't had a chance yet to visit with Julie, and some folks in the room know Julie and some don't.
Okay.
So tell us about how you found Julie Austin.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say, but Brigitte
Gabig, who had a different last name at the time.
Yes, and that was the problem. I couldn't remember her former name. Brigitte was a young lady that, a German woman, that you could understand her German probably better than her English at that time.
But she had German precision.
But you know what? She was phenomenal with understanding the grant process
yes.
and securing the funding. She did our original Tenure financial plan.
Yes.
And Brigitte decided to get married and go off and have a child. And so that left me with a vacancy. And Julie Austin was working for the MTA at that time and was Sharon helped me out.
Sharon Neely.
Sharon Neely's right hand.
Right.
And Sharon Neely, it's probably not a very flattering way to say that, but if Judy Wright was the mother of Foothill Transit, and Sharon Neely was the mother-in-law of Foothill Transit. Because you know, Sharon was a huge help to us in our formative years.
She was.
And I mean, she ran the political interference, the legislative interference, the whole 9 yards. She was phenomenal. And she helped us with securing the initial funding for Foothill Transit.
She did.
But Julie was right there. She was her top lieutenant, and so she knew all the history. She knew all the buttons to push to open the slot machines, you know, and so Julie said she would be interested in the position.
Cool. And
we had lobbied her before.
Good thing.
But she wouldn't budge. She didn't want to leave the LACTC at that time. And so when she said yes, we jumped.
Great addition.
And it was a fantastic addition.
Absolutely.
So
very cool. Let me kind of switch gears for just a second with another topic I wanted to explore. That's the whole topic of labor relations. Foothill, when it was first created, there were challenges in terms of the perception of the organization. There was a notion that Foothill was created to try to change the relationship with labor, and of course now we have both the ATU and the Teamsters represented at both of our operating mm-hmm. locations. How did that come to be, and what were the labor relations like during those early periods with our own contracted employees, but the members of the Foothill family that were delivering service?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I have to go back to when we first implemented the express service.
Sure.
with the school bus operators, they weren't union.
Okay.
And it wasn't that Foothill Transit was anti-union, because we weren't, although that makes good press.
Sure.
And so certainly we were, I think we were just anti the big, thick union contract
Sure.
that the RTD had.
All those legacy components.
That's right.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that made Foothill much more efficient to operate. But the Teamsters came in and organized ATE. And actually, we had a very good relationship with Teamsters, and worked collaboratively. They also organized Laidlaw, and I think it was more the dynamics of one contractor and the way they deal with labor management issues versus the other contractor. But we didn't want labor to be able to shut down the service. And so that's why we, back originally, I think we had 3 contractors. We consolidated that down to 2 contractors to provide some efficiency, but still be able to have that dynamic to where if you had a labor issue one place, you could offset it at the other location.
Sure. Again, the customer being the primary objective.
That's absolutely right.
Sure.
Because, you know, if we want people to use our service, they have to be able to depend on us every day.
It's got to be reliable.
And so we were able to do that. I remember that that Laidlaw had a strike, and it was very contentious. We made it clear that that's an issue between Laidlaw and the Teamsters at that location, and that all we were interested in is making sure that our contractor supplied the service as they had contracted to do. That this was not an issue with Foothill Transit, but between the employer and the Teamsters. Interesting.
A lot of history.
A lot
of history. So, one last question for you, and then we'll open it up to the group. You had some pretty good either luck or skill in selecting some staff members. We've talked about Julie. There was another young guy that came through the door at some point. What kind of qualities did you look for in terms of the people that you brought into the organization? And what advice would you give to some of our younger professionals who are really beginning their careers in the transit industry and have many of their own stories still to have unfold?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the number one key is you have to have a customer focus. If you're not focused on the customer, then this is probably the wrong organization to be part of. But then a passion for what you're doing, and be able to demonstrate that passion. With all the people, and I look around the room here and I see people that are still here, and I can't believe it's been 25 years.
Yeah,
for some of these people, maybe it's only been 20 years or 22 years, but I was talking to Aaron earlier. I didn't even recognize Aaron, sorry about that. But the fact that you started at Embry, and now that you're over here 25 years later, and you were there originally, right? And Araceli, these were kids.
Indeed.
They're
still kids.
Oh, yeah, they are to me. These are my kids. And Frank hasn't changed a bit. But and Christina, you know, it's amazing to me to come back here and be able to see these people and see what's happened with their career. And it's because I believe they've always put the customer first, and they have a passion for what they do, and you can see that passion every day. And they take pride in what they do, and you're always learning. You're always developing new skills. And when you stop asking questions, when you stop learning, that's when you start sliding back and your career's over with. And so that would be my advice, is just continue to focus on the customer, demonstrate that passion in everything that you do, and you know, look to learn something new every day.
Great advice. Absolutely. Cool. Well, let's open it up and see if there's any questions from the group here. Anybody have a burning question or thought?
Oh, another young man.
Another young man, indeed.
Not anymore.
TJ.
Thank you so much. It's just really interesting to hear about the history and everything. There's a lot of innovation, a lot of things going on that you were obviously at the helm of. Is there anything that you maybe made a mistake or would have changed? You know, kind of look back and say, hey, I think I would have done that differently.
You know, I don't recall any. I really, you know, that sounds self-serving, but it, you know, I'm so proud of this team and what they achieved back then, but even more so, what they continue to achieve. So I don't know of anything that we would have done differently. One of the things that I alluded to earlier was the lawsuits. And I don't know that we could have done anything differently. You know, it might have been that if we'd approached it a different way, we could have avoided the lawsuits and had the service on the street earlier. But at that time, you were kind of making up the game plan day by day, moment by moment.
All right, other questions?
Can you give us some more examples of the customer service, how we oriented or how we put the customer first?
Well, I think I just learned today that on the agenda tomorrow is the COA. We did our first COA back under my term as executive director. And that really focuses on service delivery. And part of that, this COA here is a marketing survey as well, to understand the attitudes and opinions of our customers. And so I think that was another example. You know, it's not meant to bash RTD or MTA at the time, but it's just reality that their focus wasn't on the customer. Their focus was running a bus system the way they knew how, where we turned it upside down and said, well, how do we serve the customer? And so one of the ways was by taking a comprehensive look at the service and realigning service, putting service where it hadn't been before, but there was demand, and then understanding where we're succeeding, but where we can improve.
You don't remember what it cost back then, do you?
I was thinking about that when you said it. Your number was a bit shocking, but you know what? It's been a few years too.
Who came up with the name Foothill, and who came up with the design of the right bus?
Actually, I think that was Bill Forsyth. There may have been some other folks had some input into that, but Bill was so creative and had such tremendous vision, and was a tremendous leader, and so I think that he was probably the catalyst.
I think that all leaders want to leave an organization in better condition than when they arrived. What do you feel is your greatest accomplishment during your tenure as the executive director, the moment that you're most proud of, that you left this organization better than how you found it?
Well, you know, the fun thing is that I was right there at the formative stage. And so there's a lot of things that we did that I look at with great pride. And one is the service standards. And I see the same service standards today. So I think that It really sets Foothill apart. I think the transit stores was very innovative. That's been copied throughout the country now, but we were the first ones with the transit stores. And so I think that's another one that really revolutionized, is that the right term?
Yeah.
How you sell passes to the public, how you disseminate information to the public. And I think that one of the things I forget to mention was the whole concept. We changed the paradigm where originally the contractor was going to provide the buses, and I think that was the case with Embry. Embry bought the buses originally, and then Foothill purchased the buses from them. But and the contractor provided the facilities. Well, you know what? Sometimes contracts go sour, and so the way I put it was that I want to be able to pick up my buses and take them wherever I need to go to provide the kind of service that I want Foothill known for. And so we did a study to build our own facilities, and the facility in Pomona was the first one that came out of that. But the original idea was that we would have 3 facilities. And because San Gabriel Valley is pretty well developed. So to be able to find some place that you can plop 100, 150, 200 buses down and not receive a lot of complaints, it's pretty difficult.
Pretty limited.
And so we did the study, and it showed that we could save substantial money by having our own facilities. And by doing that, it gave me more leverage with the contractors. Either you perform, or I pull my buses and give them to Brand X.
What kind of riderships did you have the first year that you operated Foothill Transit, and how, or what type of programs did you put out in order to let the public know that Foothill Transit is a public transit agency serving communities in the San Gabriel Valley?
Well, we didn't have a lot of money for marketing back in the early days. We continued to expand that because, and I'm a firm believer, what a lot of companies do is when they run into financial problems, the first place they compromise is marketing. The second place is usually HR. But we wanted to continue to expand the marketing, and so I think that's why you have the marketing efforts that you have today, and my compliments to you for that. But the biggest advertising vehicle we had was the service going up and down the street. And we worked hard to build a good relationship with the media. The San Gabriel Valley Tribune was not a big proponent of Foothill Transit in the beginning. It took a while for them to get on board, and then they became one of our strongest advocates. And you know what? You can go out and you can advertise and you can do all kinds of wonderful things and spend a lot of money doing that. But if you have somebody else, some third party as your mouthpiece, speaking highly of you, that's worth a lot more than any marketing dollars that you put out there. And I think that's the thing. Having clean buses and having people talk about how they can depend on your service. You know, along that same line, one of the things that, one of my favorite stories is when we went to the zero graffiti policy. This was back when I was the GM for ATE. The people took ownership in the buses because they liked the fact, they knew what it was like riding on the dirty buses with graffiti.
That's right.
And they took ownership in the nice, clean, comfortable buses. So we had some kids that were tagging the bus and doing graffiti, if that's not a familiar term to you. But, and the driver saw him. So he yelled at him, and he was just pulling over to a stop, and they jumped up and started running out the back door. And there were 5 passengers jumped up and ran off after them, tackled them, held them to the ground there until the police got there, and they were arrested. And I've never had that happen before, and I haven't had it happen since.
I bet.
You know, matter of fact, you know, one of my drivers at where I was just at, Nice Bus in New York, we had a driver that was assaulted, and just a contrast. People, there was probably 30 people on the bus, and they were taking video of it with their smartphones.
Times have changed in that regard.
Yeah.
But,
So
yeah.
to me, that's the best marketing you can have, when people take ownership. And again, you know, if I tell you about Foothill Transit and it makes a difference in your life and you decide to ride, then that's more effective than any dollars that I can spend.
Absolutely.
So.
All right. Any other questions? We got it? No? Okay.
Okay.
Well, listen, thank you all for joining us. Roger, thank you for taking the time to be here.
My pleasure.
You know, when I think about what Roger contributed, when I think about your legacy here, it really is that commission to that passion for excellence, for quality, for taking care of our customer. And I learned that from you at a ripe young age. It certainly stuck with me. I appreciate all that you taught me when you were here, and I appreciate those goals that you left behind. It really does continue to show through, and it really continues to drive what we do day in and day out. So thank you for that. I hope we continue to make you proud, and thanks for being part of this journey.
My pleasure.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much.